Hello and welcome back to the Shakeout Podcast. I'm your host, John Gay. Now, whether you call them tempo runs, steady states, threshold, or zone 3, all competitive runners and their coaches seem to agree that incorporating training that is somewhere in between very, very easy and lung-crushingly difficult is a necessary component of endurance training, regardless of whether you're preparing for a sub-4 minute mile or a 4-hour marathon. And while these types of sessions have been a staple in my own career since my high school days, it hasn't been until recent years that they've really captured the fascination of the endurance world, turning from the seldom mentioned meat and potato sessions of a training program to the cherry on top. For professional athletes the world over, myself included, the name of the game has shifted from running as hard as possible to running as controlled as possible. Why the sudden fascination with the unglamorous middle ground of endurance training? Well, for that, we can thank Norway, a country that in recent years has taken the world of distance running by storm, with such superstars as Jakob Ingebritsen dominating the global scene on the track and cross-country course and reshaping what we believe to be possible. So how has a country with a population smaller than Greater Toronto's propelled itself onto the top of Olympic podiums and turned high-performance endurance training orthodoxy on its head? And why have runners across the world, like me, turned to the method to seek a new level of performance? Turns out, the secret to success might be hiding in plain sight, with takeaways from the country's unique approach to training that could provide the key for athletes of all abilities to take their performance to the next level. This week on the show, I'm joined by sports journalist Brad Culp, author of the Norwegian Method, the culture, science, and humans behind the groundbreaking approach to elite endurance performance. Brad shares with us from his experience documenting some of the greatest endurance athletes of all time in their home country of Norway, showing how their commitment to precise controls, low intensity, and high volume has made them world beaters, and how recreational and amateur athletes can learn from the pros by slowing down in training to run faster on race day. Brad, welcome to the Shakeout Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, John. It's an honor to be here.
Really excited to dive into talking about the Norwegian Method. It's been really in vogue for so many years, and you were finally a guy who was brave enough to make the trip across the pond and really get down to the root of it. So that seems like a great place for us to start. In your own words, author of the book, The Norwegian Method, what's it all about? What is the Norwegian Method in a nutshell?
Yeah, I think some of it is a bit that a lot of people are familiar with, and of course I talk about in the book. And the two components that get the most attention are the high volume and the lactate testing. The double threshold as well is very in vogue, especially in running circles. Yeah, and those are definitely some core tenets of the Norwegian Method. But the way that I approached it in the book was looking at a more holistic view of what the Norwegian Method means, especially to Norwegians. Who kind of are take the term Norwegian Method a bit tongue-in-cheek. They laugh at it. They think a lot of them think it's completely ridiculous. A lot of them will say it's a Swedish method. But I wanted to see what that term and what that ideology really meant in Norway. And I really focused on the cultural aspect. I believe that the most important aspect in creating elite people of any kind, and especially athletes, that's what I write about, that's what I know, is culture. And there's certainly a unique culture in Norway that is producing a lot of very, very high performers from a very, very small country. I think that the Norwegian Method is a very holistic approach to building very strong athletes from a very young age. And a large focus of that is essentially how can you pack as much volume in from a very young age and do it in as smart a way possible so that you have athletes who are for 20 or 25 years are on the right trajectory and aren't stumbling. And one thing that I mentioned a lot of times in the book, and I've talked about a lot in other podcasts, is that there seems to be this ideal in Norway that, let's build the best 22 to 30-year-old athletes on earth, not the best 12 to 15-year-olds, which is probably where a lot of places, mainly the U.S., are going wrong with how we build athletes from a young age.
Yeah, I love that you talk about it being more than just a scientific method. The book lays out that this is about a whole cultural approach to building athletes in a really sustainable way. Neither of us are Norwegian, so my next question for you is, how does a guy from Illinois end up making the trip over to Norway and embedding himself with some of the best athletes, and just what sparked this fascination with this style of training?
Yeah, I have to give a little thank you to Red Bull for an assignment that sent me over to Norway, and that was to do a piece just on Christian Blumenfeld. It was shortly after he had the double of winning the Ironman world title and the Olympic gold medal. That was pretty unheard of. They sent me and a photographer over to Norway to do a feature on him for their website and their magazine, and got to know Christian a bit. Got to interview his coaches a lot through that story. Talking with Christian, it became really clear that he's very quick to credit the coaches that he was fortunate enough to work with, and who kind of ingrained this method, in him as a teenager. I was really fascinated with some of the coaches I met over there and talked to, and just certainly didn't have a completely unique view on endurance training, but I saw that there were definitely aspects that were very different from training groups that I had seen elsewhere. My first thought was that it seemed like a very Kenyan approach, very, very high mileage, very, very low intensity, and working with kids from a very young age to get bring up that volume to a world-class point. And then I had gotten home, I'd been working on some other stuff, and the idea of a book more on the method. I'd seen the reaction to the article. A lot of people were more interested in some of the training methods of R.L. Tetvian and Olaf Alexander Boo, who were Christian's two main coaches throughout his career. And the Norwegian Method just kept on coming up in articles, whether it was in Outside Magazine, whether it was in running publications. Is just a very, very hot term. I luckily wasn't the only one who had noticed that. And my first thought, I was just kind of looking at the science and the high volume, the double threshold, the lactate testing. I'm like, well, this is, 3 really good long articles, I think. But book is something much bigger. And the more I thought about my time in Norway, and I'd really, really sort of gotten into Scandinavian culture and history since then. I live in a town in Illinois that was founded by Swedes, and Norway, Illinois is just down the river from here. It's the oldest Norwegian settlement in the country, and just a lot of Scandinavian culture in this part of Illinois. I'm not Scandinavian at all, unfortunately. I kind of wish I were. I'd like to be an honorary Scandinavian at some point. I just started thinking about, the history of Norway, and sailing's, something I've been interested in my whole life and have been doing most of my life, and kind of found out that that was sort of the impetus behind their Olympic program. It all started with sailing, and thought there were some cool connections there. So I came back to this publisher with an outline. About 9 months later, that's what we came up with.
You cover a lot of ground in the book, talking about the cultural side, talking about the scientific side. You just mentioned you could have written 3 really good, really long, compelling articles about just the science, the lactate testing, the double threshold sessions, the high volume. Before we dive into more of that cultural side, I'd like to spend a little bit of time on that scientific piece and just clarify for our listeners what we mean when we're talking about terms like lactate threshold and double threshold training, because they've become very popular terms. Like we mentioned, they're very much in vogue. It seems every training group, every coach is using the term threshold or double threshold ad nauseum. Boots on the ground in Norway, what was your understanding of what the Norwegians themselves meant when they're talking about, let's start with threshold?
I think that some of their coaches really like the term threshold. Some rather despise it. I think they despise it because it gets so gray as to where people are talking about. I think that in the chapter about threshold, and the reason I bring up Marius Bakken so often and have a whole chapter about him is he was so dialed at he was so good at dialing in his exact threshold and knowing exactly where that was, and was really the first to do a ton of lactate testing on himself and then share that information with us. So I think that for the longest time, going back into like the 50s and 60s, when doctors first started researching lactate, it was just sort of understood that 4.0 millimoles was the lactate threshold, or LT2, where the lactate production becomes so great that you can't keep up that intensity of training, and your muscles aren't getting enough oxygen and everything else that goes with it. So it was just sort of understood for a long time that 4.0 was like this golden number of like, that's where the LT2, or what people commonly refer to as lactate threshold, that's where it is. Marius came along in the late 90s, which is when lactate testing really first came on in mass. And it was, the Norwegian rowers were really some of the first to push that, and that's how it sort of bled its way into running. He found for him that his lactate threshold was right around 3.0, and that any time that he spent training over that was really, really hampering both how much intensity and volume he could ultimately produce. And it was such a data nut that found that he needed to be doing, for him, his number was absurd. It was like 110, 120 miles a week in order to be at his peak. So lactate threshold, it changes for everyone. What people are typically referring to is the LT2. If you're familiar with the lactate curve, there's LT1, which is when the body starts producing a really notable uptick in lactate. Your body's always producing lactate. Even you and I sitting right here are hopefully somewhere down in the ones. I imagine we're both
Fingers
somewhat
crossed.
fit. Yeah, hopefully not too high. As you start to produce lactate, you're going to move up that curve, and sometime, between when you get to 3 to 4, maybe even 5 millimoles of lactate per liter of blood, then that's when a lot of people will start to feel what, for a long time, we would call like a lactic acid burn, which is not a real thing at all. It's just how we sort of describe that burning sensation you get when your muscles cannot get enough oxygen and cannot get enough blood to fuel them at the intensity you're going. And that's essentially your lactate threshold, that your LT2. You get above that, you're going to stop moving at that intensity. And the reason there became so much focus for Marius, and then ultimately the Ingebritsens and all these Norwegian runners and triathletes that followed, is because ultimately in these endurance events, the goal is to be redlining at as close to that threshold as possible for as long as possible. And in order to do that, you need to be dialing in your training so that you're not blowing out. You certainly want to do a lot of your training over that lactate threshold. One of the core tenets of the Norwegian method is that you want to be training all intensities at all times. But doing too much time over that threshold is ultimately going to cost the volume you can do on the session, on the day, on the week, on the entire training block. So controlling that intensity and the amount of time you spend at that threshold has really become the core tenet of the Norwegian method, especially in the purest form, which I think in the book I call Norwegian Method 1.0. It's lactate is very personal, as I'm sure you have learned. It's great to hear that you've been using it. I just started using it when I started researching this book, so I'm probably just a year in. I think, and what a lot of the Norwegian athletes, I think, especially like a Christian or Gustav would say, is it's a great way to learn your RPE and learn about your body, and really, really dial in, what the point where where your threshold is, where you are on a session or on race day. And I think that's what, at the elite level, that's what people are getting out of it is it's nice to have a really clear number on what's going on inside your body that, doesn't really change with, it's not affected by elevation or lack of sleep. It's a really honest number that doesn't sway with a bunch of variables, which I think is the most powerful part of lactate for a higher end athlete.
Definitely. You talk about the imposition of controls on intensity, and those intensity controls, as you just point out, really are the central piece, at least in my takeaway, of what the Norwegian method is all about from a scientific point of view. For those who are familiar with the method, they're probably a little bit familiar, at least, with the idea of the blood drawing, and that's something that gets a lot of attention. People think of the Norwegian method. They think of the pricking of the finger and extracting blood multiple times in a session, multiple times in a week. But you also talked just now about the RPE, that relative perceived exertion, which is a little bit more intuitive of a feel, if I'm right in saying that, less of a hard metric. How much of the method is married to that hard science versus really getting in tune with your body? You talk in the book about Jakob Ingebritsen and how he kind of famously asserts that his hardest sessions are never done higher than 87%, which seems like an insanely specific number. Does the Norwegian method do a better job than other training programs, in your opinion, of training the athlete to understand their body better, just intuitively?
Yeah, I think that the focus on intensity control from the get-go, whether that's with the triathletes or the runners, I saw a lot of the Norwegian elite swimmers training as well, and talked to their coaches, without priming them, any question about training that I would give any coach, it just immediately goes to those two words, intensity control. Maybe they're referring to lactate for one coach, or maybe heart rate for another. But I think that teaching kids that is so important, and it is so different from. I grew up swimming and swimming at a relatively high level. I got a scholarship to swim D1 in college, but. Yeah, so in the idea of intensity control was like that would be if my coach is exact opposite. It is nail every session. It is, we would have days that were easy when like our coach had beaten us into oblivion for like a week, and, 2 sessions a day, and then we might just take an easy session. But like, controlling our hard sessions, at a certain intensity, and just that idea of intensity control, which was, I saw teenagers testing lactate in Norway and controlling their swim sessions. And me thinking about the way that I was training as a teenager was like, let's see if I can pass out on this next interval, like if I can actually go unconscious. And so I think that, yeah, it probably does do a better job of teaching young endurance athletes, and probably athletes from other walks of sport as well, their RPE, by just teaching them about the idea that you can control your intensity, that it's not like the idea isn't to go as hard as possible until you are absolutely dead and then try to rebuild, that the actual building comes from just being able to hit these consistent workouts day after day after day. And yeah, I feel like so many other countries and so many other sports are so focused on, these big sessions and these big days, and not the consistency in learning what intensity control is, and how your body is feeling after the session, and how your body feels the next morning. I think that they definitely do a better job of teaching young athletes how to be a bit more intuitive and just know what control means.
So much of the fascination with these Norwegian superstars, we'll use Jakob Ingebritsen as an example. He burst onto the world scene really at 16. He became the youngest runner to ever break 4 minutes in the mile, and since then has just had this incredible upward trajectory. He's asserted that he's going to break every world record from the 1500 up to the marathon by the time his career is done, and I think a lot of people believe that's possible for him. And I think there was an assumption for so long from the outside looking in that Norway must be churning athletes out in almost a Soviet style. We're going to recruit them young and just nail into this intensity. But you talk a lot about how the culture that's produced this method of endurance training really couldn't be more different in many ways, that it stems less so from trying to squeeze everything out of these athletes at a young age, and is way more focused on that long-term development. Maybe we can talk a little bit just about what you call the biopsychosocial element of Norwegian training, how there's this mixture of environment, culture, and science in the country that seems to produce phenomenal athletes, but do so in a really sustainable way that is very different from the way that we kind of squeeze everything out of young athletes here in North America so often.
Yeah, I think it's really rooted in their ski culture, their cross-country ski culture. The running joke in Norway is that babies are born with skis on their feet. And it sounds really cliche. And like, if you go on the Visit Norway website, it's like one of the first things you see. But like, people say it and they mean it. It was like when I was interviewing Ingrid Christensen for the first time, it was like one of the first things that she said to me. And she loves it.
Lowered the world record significantly, correct?
Yeah, it was like the first to really drop it into down under 2:30. It was one of the first great female marathoners ever. And came over from cross country skiing and was one of the first to really make that shift. She talked a lot about skiing and about how the ski schools that almost every young boy and girl gets into from a very young age, the atmosphere around them. And you would think that Norway has ski schools for 4-year-olds. They must be, you would think maybe it's very Soviet and very like, we got to be the best in skiing. We're going to get every kid in here. But it's more like, it's like preschool for them. It's like play. It's how they play and interact and build their social structure is for a large part for these ski schools. And they're very fun. They're very non-competitive. There are rules about competition. As Ingrid said, it was just like 5 or 6 years of me playing with my friends outside and making friends and learning how to make friends. So I think that a lot of it is rooted in sport being a part of the social structure, and you get together and you make your friends outside, and you're always outside and often doing sport, whether it's ski or something else. And there's a very, very focus on not making competitive between clubs. I referenced the Norwegian Child Rights and Sports Act. I'm going to blank on the year, but I think it was like 91 that they passed it, maybe before that. Just rules on how far young kids can travel to compete, how often they can compete, what those competitions can look like. And it is, very, very uncompetitive from a young age. For the most part, there are certainly avenues that, it's a very free country. Athletes can go any route they want, which is why I reference, Jakob a lot, as well as Erling Haaland, for any of your listeners who are into European soccer. Arguably the best striker in the world right now, also from right by Jakob, same age. And those two had very non-Norwegian upbringings. They had very demanding fathers who probably raised them in a more Soviet style of Erling was sent off to England to be in, the best club soccer program he could. And Jakob had a dad who was a complete lunatic and was like taking his lactate at 6 years old, probably. For the most part, the culture around sport is really viewed as something that is welcoming to all kids, and it's something that once these kids start doing sport, very often cross-country skiing, it becomes their social structure, it becomes how they learn, it becomes how they enjoy life. I think that you do that right from the young age, it just completely changes their view on sport and their development and the joy that they get out of it. I don't, even Jakob, who's the one who's, really, really been, hit over the head, like you are going to be the world's greatest runner. At least from what I can tell online and everything and through his YouTube show, he seems to be having a great time doing exactly, what he loves. It's a great way to build a love of sport. And I really think that it starts with those ski schools at a young age.
It seems there's such a exploration element to the style of training, both in Jakob, who's someone that seems to be constantly chasing, okay, how can I get better? How can I continue to use these methods to improve myself? What was your experience like shadowing athletes while you were in Norway? It seemed, from what I could gather, that curiosity that was fostered through their youth sports system is something that never really stops. It really remains a core piece of the method, even at the highest levels. It's less so about, well, we've always done it this way, and more so about seeing new ways that they can do it and this constant iterative process. Am I touching on anything there?
Yeah, I think that what you just said is, every conversation I've had with Olaf Alexander Boo, who has been the head coach of Christian and Gustav for most of like the last 6 or 7 years, and he's kind of taken a sidestep and bringing on some other coaches to help them now. But I think that just like Jakob, you reach a certain level and you either have to be totally satisfied and find something new, which is why I think we heard Christian tease maybe going to race the Grand Tours or signing a pro cycling contract. or you have to find these really creative, unique ways to improve and to get better. Where at the point that they're at, those margins are so thin, and a lot of athletes, truly cannot get better. So yeah, I think that there's a Norwegian element of exploration and trying new things. And Christian, it's funny seeing him on social media now. He's spending a lot more time in Norway, in Bergen. While I was there with him, he was for the most part kind of bad mouthing it and saying, this is why Norwegians have always left Norway. And it's true, they are voyagers. A lot of going back to the Viking history, there are generations of Vikings who never actually saw Norway because they were out conquesting for, literally 2 centuries. I think that explorative element, both, seeing nature and learning about yourself through it and through these tough tests is very Norwegian. There's a drive to explore among Norwegians, at least the ones that I've interacted with. That's pretty cool and it's certainly motivating.
When you open the book, you talk about how the Norwegian method is discovering how science can become more human focused and more focused on the unique physiological and psychological needs of the individual. And you say so that each human body can achieve its own peak. And that's, I think, a great place to transition into how we can apply this to non-elites, because it is such a popular concept. And yet it's one that I think sounds very daunting to many who maybe are even competitive athletes themselves, but the idea of stabbing themselves in the finger every day seems like a big stretch. And you talk a lot about how it's so much more than just the blood drawing, the lactate testing, but really about just tweaking all of the different areas of your life to find what your personal limits are. And I'd love to maybe dive into how we can find applications for this for the competitive athlete who's looking to improve, but is doing so in less of a confined space to, say, a world champion like Jakob, whose whole life is about maximizing that 0.5 percentage point. Are there ways that, I don't want to say lesser athletes, but let's say age group athletes can apply some of these methodologies to their own training?
Definitely ways that I think anyone, even down to the newest beginner training for their first Ironman, can sort of make their training more Norwegian and maybe a bit smarter. I think that a little bit of it is just applying some hubris to your training, and I trained for a triathlon for 20 years, probably. Having way too much intensity. I have a bad day. I want to have a hard session, or I feel good and I want to see what I have in my legs, and learning, adding a bit of intensity control and really a bit of humility and understanding. There's big focus on zone 2 training right now, and that's certainly some Norwegian coaches love zone, some don't. But the idea of being very, very relatively low intensity training where you might feel like you're going way too easy, and for some people, beginners or even middle of the pack age group athletes, your zone 2 might be a hard hike, and you can also learn that very, very well through heart rate. Heart rate is it's not lactate, but you can do so much with heart rate, and heart rate was it was new stuff to the Norwegians in the 70s when they first got it from the Swedes, who really invented heart rate training. And it worked, it's worked really, really well for a long time. And you can really learn your zones and learn to learn how much you can reduce the intensity so that you can do more volume. And I think that most age group athletes are going to benefit, whether it's each month, each year, from slowly bringing up that volume. And I think you see it, the difference between someone who's a Boston qualifier and someone who's maybe 30 or 40 minutes off. It's almost always a question of volume, and that in order to do that, you might need to swallow a little bit of humble pie and learn what low intensity really means, and get comfortable training there for long periods of time. Most people ask how they can make their training more Norwegian. I tell them, like, the simplest thing, I'm like, slow down and do more. and start there, and then the other stuff is kind of the icing and the cherries on top, but yeah, that's really the base.
For so many of us, there's a real joy in pushing our limits in training. You talk about yourself as a teenager, just trying to see if you could pass out at the end of a workout. And I remember even when I was learning this method, it flipped a lot of that orthodox thinking on its head, because some of these sessions, so when I started, I was doing the classic Norwegian running sessions that Marius Bakken had kind of pioneered in the early 2000s of 5 by 6 minutes in the morning, 25 by 400 in the afternoon. And it's this huge amount of volume, and yet none of it is particularly difficult. I found, and I think my experience is similar to many other pros in North America who adopted the method after seeing the success of people like Jakob Ingebritsen, I found it was almost boring. I was out there for all this time thinking, okay, this is not particularly easy, but I'm not bent over gasping for air. How much value could I actually be getting out of this? And yet suddenly you start stacking these weeks where you're almost doubling the amount of this medium intensity that you would typically do in a week. And you never feel like you're going to the well doing this training. That was my experience, at least. And yet you get to race day and suddenly there seems to be these huge reserves waiting for you. How difficult do you think it is for athletes to overcome that hump of saving everything for race day? So much of, I think, an athlete's self-worth often is based on going to the depths of themselves in training so that they're fired up and confident in their ability to suffer on race day. And the Norwegian method seems to be a rebuke to that, a rebuttal to that actually, no, work out at, let's say, to use Jakob's terminology, work out at that 87% and trust that the work will pay itself off on race day. That's the day to go at your absolute hardest. Was that a difficult transition for you to make? Have you noticed that transition to be difficult for other athletes to make when they first start adopting these methods?
For sure. Yeah, definitely for me, and definitely I think that's where a good coach can probably help. Just you need that kind of reassurance that this is going well, and and that's also where call them B or C races, or like test workouts, little kind of carrots along the way to have to reassure the athlete that things are going according to plan. While the coach knows that all of this, this low intensity, high volume is doing the important things, building capillaries and boosting blood volume and doing all the things that, from a day-to-day experience that an athlete can never feel, and even week to week. But this is the kind of stuff that takes a season or multiple seasons to build. It's almost, it takes an athlete with a lot of experience, or an athlete who really trusts themselves, to kind of do it on their own. And I think that's where, even if you're an athlete who's not super into data, if you have a coach that you're feeding, power and heart rate, and maybe even lactate numbers too, the best coaches can really see those numbers, see that things are going on the right way, and make minor adjustments to the plan as they need, without the athlete needing some mega workout that he has to tell all his buddies about and post on Strava. But it takes a very, very long time and a lot of humility, and might need a good coach to give that reassurance that no, everything is going on the right trajectory. Just keep stacking these days, and you got to be really patient. And that's kind of the ticket, is having that belief in the system and being patient enough to see those big results on race day.
You talk about the increase in volume and these almost jaw-dropping numbers, 180K, 120 miles, we'll call it, of running volume is pretty standard run-of-the-mill for the professional athletes doing this. And even when I started with the Norwegian method of training, I noticed this huge spike in the amount of volume that I was doing in a week. And yet, almost counterintuitively, it was more sustainable than when I'd been training at a far higher intensity at a lower volume. And again, it kind of pushes against the grain of thinking, oh, well, if I up my volume, it's probably going to result in injury. But in so many cases with the Norwegian method, that increase in volume is one that actually helps build a more sustainable athlete. What do you attribute that to? Is it the lack of high intensity, or is it just the repeatability of doing these sessions, oftentimes 2 hard sessions in a day, and creating more space in between? Is there some secret to the method that seems to allow people to both increase their volume and increase their ability to recover?
Yeah, I think that if there is any sort of magic juice to the double threshold concept, it isn't necessarily in that having 2 hard, we call hard threshold sessions in the same day really like supercharges the system. It's just a smarter way of blocking your hard threshold days, so that around those you can build out the most volume possible, and you're not costing yourself for multiple days. So if you had, say you want to get, an athlete wants to get 4 threshold sessions in a week, use an example of Jakob. If he spread those out over 4 days, that leaves only 3 other days to get any other kind of sessions in. By stacking 2 of those, say on a Monday and a Friday, now you've got 5 other days where you can pack in a lot of relatively low intensity volume, and some people would call that a recovery day. Jakob certainly wouldn't. Most of the Norwegian coaches don't like the idea of a recovery day. Every day has a purpose. I started calling it more like a volume day or a threshold day is how I look at it.
Yeah.
That's certainly not a Norwegian concept. That's just an easy way for me to kind of to block it off and understand what the purpose of the day is. But yeah, I think that ultimately finding smarter ways to block your intensity so that it's not costing you for the following session is very key. And that's why you see Jakob, is pretty standard for him to run 13 times a week if he doesn't have a race, and doesn't really deviate from that much. That was pretty standard, for a lot of the Norwegian runners, throughout Marius as well, who modeled so much of his training after the Kenyans who trained that way. I think that there's so much, for so long, there was so much lore of, if you add more than 5 to 10% per week, you're going to get hurt, and focus on adding 5 to 10% of volume is a big no-no. Whereas the problem was probably that there was too much intensity to not allow for that increase in volume, and that there's a much, much higher risk of injury to do a high intensity workout on tired legs than to do a long, low intensity workout. I think that's ultimately where a lot of people will find a big benefit is be fine if you have to dial back that intensity, drop it intense, a threshold session, whatever, VO2 session, whatever you want to call it, whatever session you like doing, maybe pull that back and add some more volume and stick with it for a couple months and track your progress. And I think most people will find that they will really, really benefit from that.
Slow down to run faster on race day. It's a tough thing to wrap the head around and to gain that confidence, but when you do give it some time, and it's been my experience in my own career, the results do tend to show through. How can athletes measure their intensity and make sure that they're staying in that middle or low intensity zone, short of doing lactic acid testing? And I'd love to talk a little bit more later in the show about how they can implement the lactate testing if there's those who are lactate curious. But short of stabbing yourself in the finger and the earlobe, what are some of the ways that an athlete with, let's say, a GPS watch, how can they be using lesser tools to achieve some of the same results?
Yeah, I would encourage, if athletes aren't using zone training, I would certainly encourage them to. I talk a lot early on in the book about differentiating zones and how we use different terminologies. I believe that for most people, and for the athletes I've coached and worked with, that a 5-zone system makes a whole lot of sense. The classic Norwegian system that Marius was using kind of only needed 3. I think most people can work better off of a 5-zone system. For runners, I would recommend using heart rate to learn those zones. But yeah, you can do very similar to a lactate test. Call it a ramp test, where you're ramping up the intensity. To anyone who's ever done like a max heart rate test or a VO2 test is probably familiar with this. But yeah, you want to find ultimately where not your I want to put lactate on top of everything because I spend so much time with it. But you're essentially learning where your inflection points are and where these big spikes in heart rate are and where you can do the most sustainable volume. And for a lot of newer athletes, that zone 2 might be down in 110 to 125 beats per minute. Could be even lower. As you get more well trained, just like lactate, just with power, that curve's going to lift. I remember Tadej Pogacar when he was on I think it was the Huberman podcast, and he blew everyone's mind with explaining that his zone 2 is like 148 beats per minute at 340 watts.
Wow, yeah, Tour de France winner Tadej.
Yeah, so
some
that's
unreal numbers.
Right, yeah, your zone 2 will not be there. But learning where that sweet spot is, where you can really get in a ton of volume and not be costing yourself. And it's going to take time because every athlete is so individual. It's why I really believe that lactate is so valuable, because it's varies so much between athlete and can really teach you a lot about yourself. But yeah, you can you learn those zones via heart rate or via power, and then use that to control your intensity. So yeah, heart rate especially, it's what I use for the most part for intensity control. It's completely non-invasive. I started using lactate probably differently from you. I just wanted to learn about it so I could write about it. I found that it did give a big boost to my training. It's as anytime you introduce a new device that is fun and different, I think that it's just kind of unique, and you're learning something new about your body, and that's exciting. So for people who are kind of looking for a boost, and I use the term lactate curious. I love that. It can be fun. Like, it looks sort of painful and weird, but
a bit masochistic.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of the appeal. And I've seen the way that Christian and Gustav and Jakob use it in their videos. I'm like, they're sick. They're like actually they're having fun, like bleeding and hurting themselves. I'm not really into needles, so it was definitely hard for me at first, but they are really little needles. And I mean, as I'm sure you've experienced, after you do it a few dozen times, you don't really think about it. So yeah, I would encourage people who are lactate curious. It's gotten way cheaper. There's a lot of good options on the market. You can get test strips again, which is like a big problem for a long time. But heart rate is very, very good for 90+% of the field, I would say.
And say somebody does spend a couple $100, buys a lactate meter. How do they start incorporating that into their training? What are some workouts that they can do in order to start establishing that baseline, testing themselves, becoming familiar with what these numbers mean so that they can actually apply it to getting better?
Yeah, I think it's best treadmill workouts or track workouts are going to be the best place. Anything that is interval related. I give an example of if you want to test lactate for the first time and sort of learn where your inflection points are. A really popular workout is repeat 800s, and it's really important to do it after a big warm up, because to really get your body producing lactate and get on that curve is going to take some time. And as you've experienced, if you just go out and run like a 400-meter repeat totally fred, your lactate is going to spike. It's going to go sky high really quick before it mellows out. And that's, the lactate curve when you're doing an interval session doesn't actually look like it does on the, that we all see. There's a lot more to it. 400s or 800s are great. 800s can build a bit more lactate, and I think timing wise, that's pretty great. You could do 5 or 6 800-meter repeats with some easy jogging or complete rest in between, roughly a minute, and you'd be testing lactate at the end of each one, upping the intensity with each effort, and ultimately on the last one you're trying to get yourself above your LT2 and seeing how high you can raise that lactate. And then, any of the new lactate meters, I have the Edge one. They have pretty good software that you can then plug that into to find that it'll essentially draw out a curve for you. You can lay that over your heart rate, which is very, very valuable if you're not someone who wants to test lactate all the time. Yeah, I think that the value, even if you're not going to test regularly, there is some value in maybe once or twice a year of getting that lactate test to. One, so like I said, you can kind of lay it over your heart rate curve, and so you can be applying it that way. And two, just sort of see throughout the season, throughout the year, that your curve is lifting and that whatever you're doing is actually working.
And is there a necessity of doing these sessions as double sessions? So much has been made of Jakob Ingebritsen's Tuesday, Thursday double threshold sessions, where he's essentially doing 2 10K workouts a day, 2 days a week. Is it necessary to be doing twice in a day, or can lesser athletes or athletes that just have other life commitments get some value from doing, let's say, one of these sessions a week or 2 of these sessions, but on separate days of the week?
Yeah, I think what you just said, 2 of those sessions, separate days of the week, is probably a good bread and butter for most athletes, and not trying to double up. A lot of people have asked me, like, at what point would you start considering double threshold? Like, what level of athlete does that have to be at? I would probably someone who is upwards of 60, maybe upwards of 70 miles a week. And
so that kind of 100 to 115 kilometers for our metric Canadian
listeners.
Yes.
And that for men, probably a bit under 3 hours for a marathon, if they're a marathon trainer, that maybe under 3:15, 3:20 for women. So that Boston level high performing, they might be at a point where they could benefit from blocking those threshold sessions in a double manner. And that's really, it's just a way to get in both more threshold volume and more below threshold value by blocking them like that. But until you get to that point, I don't think that you're really there is no magic in the double threshold itself. It's not that it's having those 2 back-to-back sessions is really supercharging you in any way. It's just if you're at the point where that's the smartest way for you to increase both your high and low intensity volume, it's a great way to do it. Probably smarter than adding a 3rd hard day and messing up the rest of the schedule. So yeah, I would wait till I was very, very high volume and pretty high performing to really make that a core of your training. If it's something that you're curious about and you want to do 2 high intensity sessions in a day, great. I'd say just really focus on that intensity control so that they're not way, way over threshold, and then you're really bearing yourself for one day.
Yeah, it's you use this rule of thumb in the book. If you're at a point where one session is, say it even is intended to be that medium intensity, let's call it a lactate threshold session, but you're getting to the point where it's gotten so long that keeping it at your threshold or below it becomes impossible. Maybe I'll use the example of 16 kilometers or a 10-mile threshold session at, let's say, marathon pace. At some point, it becomes difficult to actually keep that in the correct sub-threshold zone. And that's really when it seems you advocate for trying to split it up into a couple of sessions in a week. Maybe it becomes 2 times 10 kilometers at that pace, split out on a Tuesday and a Thursday. And so the total volume that you're hitting is greater than that original 16-kilometer session, but the impact on your body from any one of those 2 sessions is slightly lower and allowing for more time to recover. And that really seems to hit at what the best in the world, like Jakob, are doing. Is they're less concerned with any one session being particularly hard. He even says that he believes most of his competitors are training far harder than they have to, and some people would call that arrogance on his part, or maybe not understanding just how talented he is. But is there something to be said for that, of just, again, getting back to the core of the Norwegian method? It really seems to be all about just maximize the amount of volume you can do. It doesn't matter if it's done all at once, as long as you're getting it in and recovering from it. You can break it up almost any which way you want.
Yeah, I love the term stimulus. That's something that Olaf beat over my head every time I interviewed him, and was really trying to understand the idea behind the double threshold. Excuse me. He looks at it, intensity and volume together as ultimately building stimulus, and he wants as much stimulus possible without hurting his athletes. And so he's constantly looking at that fine line of anytime you increase one, you may have to decrease the other. You might have to. It's a very fine balance of not adding too much stimulus to the point that the body can't take. And ultimately, throughout the course of a season or year to year, you want there to be more stimulus, and that's where athletes are going to continue to improve. I'm sure not knowing as much about the nuance of Jakob's training, that's probably where he's at now is discovering those very fine lines of where he can actually get some more stimulus to get those last few seconds that he's looking for to achieve these records. Ultimately it takes a lot of control to do that the right way. It's very, very easy to tip over and get hurt and cost yourself. It's much, much harder to dial it back and stay right on that line. I think that's again, for most people, once you get to a certain level, I think that you do need a good coach kind of overseeing that system who knows you well, to rein you back, especially these super high performing athletes who obviously don't struggle for motivation or to go deep. They always want that more stimulus, but to get there, it often requires some very, very controlled intensity.
Before people rush off and start jumping into double thresholds and taking blood and throwing all of their other training out the window, have you experienced any pitfalls for someone who's fired up by learning all about this? They want to be the next great endurance athlete. What's the best way to incorporate this in a sustainable way?
That's a good question. You don't have to go all in on the Norwegian Method right away. There are levels to the Norwegian Method game. I've sort of started by just dabbling, and when I first started researching this book and talking to the coaches that I was interviewing and understanding their philosophies of training, I was like, all right, I'm probably training a little stupid. I really, for a long time I come from a swimming background, and figuring out running has been a 25-year process for me and has been very difficult. And it's part of why I love the marathon. It's like this big challenge, and like one day I want to qualify for Boston, and I'm turning 40 in a couple of months. So like all of a sudden it
new age group.
Well, it gets in my wheelhouse, sort of, yeah. And the shoes have gotten really good. At first I was like, all right, just dial back these maybe stupid intense sessions and really see how I can increase volume and realize, for the longest time I was running about 30 miles a week for years on end as a triathlete who's doing swim has always been my highest volume, and I still compete just in the water, so I focus there, and realizing that 30 miles of running a week is just never going to get me anywhere. And so I started, this is maybe 2 years ago, I was like, all right, let's spend 6 to 8 months and get this to 40. And what do we have to do to get there? I found that, it was a lot of zone 2 training, and for a while just completely eschewing any kind of intensity, and got to 40 and was like, okay, how do we get to 50? Because if all of a sudden my paces are this much faster going from 30 to 40, there has to be, equal. And I did find, for any of your listeners who are running around 40 miles a week, I found that there is I love the term that Gordo Byrne, who a lot of your followers may be familiar with, he uses the term exit velocity for fitness. And I feel that right around 50 miles of running a week, there is an exit velocity where you can really, really start to improve your fitness and your numbers and just your fitness in general, not just in running. And each time I've tried to make these little, jumps over about 6 months or so. I did find that it took a lot of humility and a lot of runs where, previously I felt like I'm not doing anything, and this is kind of a waste of a day. But seeing that over the course of a year that can make a big difference, it was huge. And it takes a little humility and a lot of patience. This is a patient method of training, and that's why it has worked so well. And it's coaches and athletes who are taking a very, very long-term approach to performance and to fitness. So if you're looking to incorporate pieces, you don't have to go all in all at once and get the lactate meter right away. Just have a little bit of humility. Try to maybe have a mileage goal in mind. If you're a runner, be like, can I get this up to 70 a week or wherever you are? Just be really slow and methodical about getting there. And most of us have nothing but time. You might have a race on your schedule, but it's really just zoom out and take your time to get to whatever that big goal is.
Slow down in the short term so you can speed up in the long term. And I think also crucially, stay in the sport longer. This is a sustainable method of training that all of the athletes that you cite in the book have had remarkably injury-free careers. And if that's not a compelling argument to adopt some of these principles, then I don't know what else would be. Brad, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I think you've given all of our listeners, myself included, a lot of exciting pieces that we can start incorporating into our own training if we haven't done so already. And thanks for pulling back the curtain on what they're doing in Norway and how we can apply it here. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you, John. I really appreciate it. It was fun.
Yeah, and all the best with all of your training, and we'll look forward to seeing you on a Boston start line very soon in that 40-plus age group.
There you go.
Another huge thanks to Brad for coming on this week and sharing about the Norwegian Method, from how it works to his own experience implementing it, and how athletes of all abilities can apply the same principles to achieve great results and accomplish their own racing goals. You can find his book, The Norwegian Method, on shelves and online. It's a great read for anyone looking to go even deeper into the science and culture behind Norway's endurance sport dominance. Whether you're a hardcore double threshold disciple or just learning to listen to your heart rate and training, send us a message and let us know how you're incorporating the Norwegian Method principles into your own training. You can connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, or X at the Shakeout Podcast, and leave us your comments and reviews. They help us so much in ensuring we continue bringing you great stories from the running world just like this one. As always, I'm your host, John Gay, saying thanks again, and we'll see you next time for your weekly Shakeout.